Hello, we're going to be talking about this book in this video, Gifts Differing by Isabel Myers-Briggs. Isabel Myers-Briggs is very famous because she came up with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, a personality test, a series of questions which people answer, and then they get 4 letters which categorises or describes their personality type. Just before we talk about what those letters mean, Isabel Myers-Briggs is an interesting character. She was homeschooled by her mother. Her mum was deeply interested in personality, and she actually introduced Isabel, the daughter, the lady who wrote this book, to the work of Carl Jung. Carl Jung wrote a very influential book called Psychological Types. It's very complex, quite typical of Carl Jung. It's difficult to read. Some of the concepts are very complex. He wrote it really for psychologists and experts in the field of psychology and personality. Carl Jung also wrote about personality based on his work as a clinician and as a psychiatrist. So arguably his research and his experience more often than not involved people whose psychology was not quite functioning normally, or people who had issues that they went to Carl Jung to hopefully get treatments for. And so arguably Carl Jung's work is a little bit skewed towards people who have sort of abnormal or extreme, people on the periphery regarding balance and all of the different aspects of the psyche that Carl Jung spoke about and wrote about extensively. But leaving that to one side, this book and this personality test is based on the work of Carl Jung. Isabel, this lady, she actually came up with her own categories, her own descriptions. So she came up with, for example, the idea of the executive, sociable, meditative, and there was one other, but I can't quite remember what it was. But she came up with a number of words to describe personality. When she read Carl Jung's psychological types, she largely abandoned her descriptions, her concepts, her categories, and she used the language of Carl Jung. So words like introvert, extrovert, shadow, the shadow personality. Largely her work is based on the language and the work of Carl Jung. It's important to understand that because that's the origins of her definitions and her descriptions. So it is possible to take the personality test. Millions of people have taken it. I think it was actually completed in the early 1980s. It went through a number of different stages. So it changed over a period of time and was adapted according to the research of Isabel Myers-Briggs. But she never received any formal schooling. She never went to university and studied psychology. So she did actually suffer with some degree of hostility and antagonism because of her lack of schooling in psychology. But she persevered. This book was actually written while she was suffering with cancer, and it was published posthumously after her death. I think 3 months after her death, this book was published. She was around 85 at this time, so she spent her entire life studying personality. Some of the reasons she gives for doing so includes she lived through the First and Second World War. So she claims in the book that she wanted to improve people's understanding of other people, of their personalities and why they see things differently, so that they wouldn't be in conflict. And the wars obviously are a brutal example of different ways of viewing the world, different personalities, and the conflict that can arise through a difference in personality. And of course in the wars that takes on a more extreme form. She also says that one of the effects of the First and Second World Wars was that because men were fighting, she was born in Washington, so she's an American. Whilst many men went to Europe to fight, women entered the workplace, and she became interested in personality because she wanted to help women find the right job that fitted their personality. So she became interested in this field of study, this line of inquiry, and exploring personality type because of the demand, which became apparent when the labour market was in need of new workers and of people to fill the jobs, left by the men who went to fight in Europe. So it's an interesting backstory, it's an interesting context, it's worth checking out. In the book, there is a biography included, very small in scope, not tremendously detailed. The vast majority of this book, the bulk of the book, is about the study of personality, and it's about the Myers-Briggs type indicator in detail. Some of the things that I've been very impressed with in this book is that it's very easy to understand. It's also very believable as well, and I'll come on to why. But in the book, there are diagrams. So people have answered the Myers-Briggs personality test, and there is strong correlation between aspects of the Myers-Briggs and occupation. So for example, one thing that made me think there's more to this than I had previously thought, I have to say, I've always been a bit sceptical of personality type. One of the reasons for that is that I've always thought that personality is very complex. It's not possible to categorise and simplify it without making quite serious errors. And therefore, in my previous experience, I've just kind of thought, well, why bother? Humans are so complex. It's not really possible to gain from trying to come up with concepts and descriptions. But actually, I've been quite impressed. I think there is quite a lot in this theory and to this theory. I think there is some truth, particularly in some aspects of it. So going back to lawyers, for example, one of the letters, we'll come onto this in a second, is F versus T. You're either a person who thinks rationally, logically, T, you would be described as a T, or you're an F and you let your feelings and your emotions guide your decisions and your journey through life. So you're either an F or a T. And one thing that the book indicates is that lawyers very much T. And this, if you think about it, is what one can observe in solicitors, lawyers. Sometimes their emotions, their ability to empathise and connect with people is always not very highly developed. It's not a natural thing for them to embrace and be warm and sympathetic. They can be quite sort of, the law is the law, and it's a rational decision that's being made, and there's little place for human emotion. So let's talk about these letters. So if you take the test, you will get 4 letters to describe your personality. For each of those 4 letters, there's 2 possibilities. So for the first one, you will be either an I or an E. Okay, so you will get an I or an E for the first letter. I is for introvert, and E is for extroverts. Now, introverts tend to prefer their own company. They're more interested in what's going on inside their own heads, ideas, concepts, their imagination. They can get lost in their own fantasies and dreams. And, you know, the person who often stares into empty space and they seem to be in a world of their own, these people are introverted. Extroverts, on the other hand, they prefer to be around people. They're more interested in the external world, objects, things, and people. These two are quite different. Extroverts are energized by being around people and by being around different things. Introverts are fatigued by being in social situations. They get tired. It's not their natural habitat. They don't really enjoy it. So you're either an I or an E. The second part of it is you're either an N or an S. Okay? And what this is referring to is how you process information. I means you're an intuitive personality. Intuitive. And S means you're a sensing person. So intuitive means that you're more interested in patterns, in abstract ideas, in possibilities, in associations, in tenuous connections. You're able to connect the dots, or your brain connects the dots. Intuitives tend to be better when it comes to words, reading. There is some research which has suggested that intuitives do better in school because they're able to read faster, because they're able to derive meaning from the words and connect the words, and so they're able to intuitively get through things quicker. They're able to infer meaning intuitively. It can help with creativity if they're able to create new things, because they can see things beyond the mere facts. Sensing people get their information through their ears, their eyes, their nose, their touch, and their taste. They prefer hard facts, the here and now. What's in front of me? This information is here, this is what we know, not interested in possibilities, these are the actualities. So these are very practical-minded people, very practical, pragmatic people, the sensing types. The third category is F versus T. Feeling versus thinking. This one's a bit more self-explanatory. So are you somebody who primarily thinks rationally, logically, decides in terms of pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages, loss and gain, is objective, numerical, data-driven in deciding what to do? Or are you somebody who is guided by their emotions? They will only do things that make them feel good, makes them happy, They try to avoid conflict because they don't like, you know, dissonance and disagreement. The book does suggest that there is a difference between men and women, on average, not in every case, because you'll find women very much thinkers, and men who are very much feelers. But the book does suggest that there is some difference on aggregate, on average, when it comes to this particular aspect. The other aspects doesn't seem to suggest that there are any real differences between male and female, but the book does suggest there is some difference between F and T. And the last one is you can either be a P or a J. The P's are the perceivers. They prefer perception. I'll write down perception. This might be a little bit small. Versus the judging types. The judging types can be very opinionated. They believe and they act as if the world is to be determined by action, by decision making, by imposing human will and order on the world. The perception types, they prefer to just observe things moving, and they don't really want to impose their will onto the world, as it were. They prefer to just let things be and see how things play out. So these are very much strong decision makers. The judges are strong decision makers. They prefer to have things settled and done and established, make a decision, and then move on. Whereas the more perceptive types prefer to leave things open and have versatility, adaptability. They can move around. So how do you think you would come out on this personality test? I haven't taken the test, but I would probably describe myself as I prefer to be immersed in a book by myself, thinking by myself. I actually find it quite tiring being around people. One of the great things that the book helps with is understanding oneself. And you can sort of think that there's maybe something a little bit wrong with you. Like you're not particularly sociable, and that sort of has a negative stigma almost, or you're an unsociable person. But there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just your personality, and there are millions of people like you. And the book does indicate the relative percentages of people of the 16 types. So there's 8 letters in total. So there are 16 possible combinations. But just staying with this one, so I would probably be an introvert, N, T, and then P. I'm not very good at making decisions. That's one particular aspect of my own personality. I always leave things to the last minute, let time work its effect, and leave things until a decision really has to be made. That is one aspect of my personality. But what are you? How would you classify yourself in terms of those different categories? This has been a very successful book. Millions of copies have been bought and read, so do check it out. I'm going to make another video next week about some of the implications of this Myers-Briggs type indicator, as well as its possible flaws, or its possible its possible errors or where it's not useful. I'll make a second video next week talking about what other research is available, what other theories are available, which might be better in predicting human behaviour. One of the big criticism of this is that it's not very useful in the workplace because it doesn't predict performance. But we'll come on to that next week. Hopefully this is just an introduction to the book, Gifts Differing. It's an excellent book. It's backed up by data and an attempt to be objective. Just to show you what I was referring to earlier, in relation to the law students, this might be complex because if you've not read the book, you're not really going to understand what this means, but I'll just quickly try to explain it. So if you look at this table, so these are the 16 personality types given by the letters. And what they've done with this box is that they've put the thinking, T is here and here, and the F's are in the middle, and these are lawyers. So this is what you would expect lawyers to be. More thinking types than emotional types, because they're more clinical, they're more sort of interested in what is, rather than what it feels like. So you would expect lawyers to be high on T rather than F, and that's what this indicator shows. So do give the book, consideration. You can buy it on Amazon if you wish to do so. Thank you very much.